Hello and welcome to Raj Sabha TV. You're watching The Big Picture with your host Rajat Kane. In this episode, we'll take up the issue of proposal before the UNSC to ban Jaish-e-Muhammed chief Masood Azhar. India wants a Pak-based terror syndicate head banned, but there is a huge China wall it needs to scale. Days after the suicide terror attack at Pulwama, which killed 40 armed force personnel, the US, UK and France moved a fresh proposal in UN Security Council to designate Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. Now, this is fourth such bid at the UN forum in last 10 years to list him as a global terrorist. The listing that will subject him to global travel ban, asset freeze and arms embargo. As the 15-nation Security Council is set to consider this fresh proposal submitted on Wednesday, all eyes will be on China, which is yet to announce its stand. China has so far skirted the issue and has instead said a responsible solution can only come through discussions. Asked about India's appeal and China's stand on the issue, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson has told the press that China's position on the designation of terrorist by 1267 Sanctions Committee is consistent and clear. It has always adopted a responsible attitude, follows the rule of procedures in committee and participating in discussion in a responsible manner. Only through discussions can we come up with a responsible solution. Now, what does lack of clarity in Chinese stand means for the UNSC, Masood Azhar, Pakistan and India? To discuss more on the issue, we're joined with three guests in our studio. Thanks all of you for joining us. We have former diplomat Masood Azhar. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Shrikant Kodanpalli from JNU, and you're expert in Chinese language. Thank you, sir. Mr. Sajjanhar, I'd like to start with you first. If we go threadbare into the procedures that needs to be adopted by the nations discussing this issue at UN, what are the procedures? We know a proposal has been moved by 3 countries and now it will be taken up by 15 nations.
Yeah, 15 nations of the UN Security Council, 5 of them permanent and 10 of them non-permanent members of the UN Security Council. So any proposal that comes for listing under the 1267 Committee of the United Nations Security Council. So discussions take place and decision is to be taken by consensus. So as you mentioned yourself, as the report has mentioned, that it is the 4th time that Masood Azhar's name is being brought in under this committee resolution in the UN Security Council. And all these times it has been China which has put an obstacle. Initially it put what was called a technical hold, and so that has not been able to move forward, because as we know that in the UN Security Council, the 5 permanent members have a veto. So if there is a veto that is exercised by any of the permanent members, then that proposal is not accepted. Right. And so far, whenever this issue has come, China has always put a hold, put an obstacle, and so it has not been able to go forward. As you mentioned yourself, they said dialogue. China has been following a very responsible, taking a responsible approach according to the procedures of the committee. Now, what China has also maintained is that there is no consensus in the UN Security Council. Now, if it itself is standing in the way of a consensus, because all the other countries have openly stated that Masood Azhar has to be on that proscribed list under the resolution 1267, and in the current case, it is Jaish-e-Muhammed which has accepted responsibility for the Pulwama attack. So there is no doubt as to who has been responsible. And if we were to look at it, Jaish-e-Muhammed as an organization has been under a UN Security Council ban under the same committee since 2001. So if the organization is under a ban, has been under a ban for the last 18 years, how can its leader not be under the ban? Because after all the activities and all the violence that is perpetrated by Jaish-e-Muhammed, and there are several cases of attacks in India, then they go back to the organization and to the leader of the organization.
That's important. Mr. Bansal, as Mr. Azhar just mentioned, that when organization is banned since 2001, what is preventing the head of this organization to be banned, and why China has always acted as cover for Pakistan? What are Chinese reasons for not supporting this bid?
See, not only is the head of the organization not banned, Masood Azhar is also the founder of the organization. We need to understand that. And Masood Azhar is a proclaimed terrorist who was languishing in Indian jails and was released after hijacking an Indian passenger liner, which is a clear-cut act of terrorism. So, as far as Masood Azhar is concerned, there is no ambiguity left in anybody's mind that he is a terrorist, because the manner in which he was released and the people who were released with him have also indulged in different acts of terror. So, so that's what I said. There is no doubt about it that he belongs to a very, very small group of hardened terrorists. And in that sort of a situation, I think the global community has by and large agreed. What China has tried to do is that it has put it on technical hold. When we talk to Chinese negotiators, when we meet them and track to dialogues, etc., what they say that we are seeking more information. Now, this in other words is just one way of delaying it. Without saying that we are not opposing it, they are just delaying it. Now, delaying has the same effect as opposing it. However, I get a feeling that maybe this time China might support the proposal or might abstain.
This is important. What makes you feel that? I mean, what are the reasons that you're saying that this time China may change its, because it will be change of stand effectively?
Yeah, I'll tell you why I feel so, because there have been certain statements which have come from China which are very interesting. One of them is that we are equidistant now from India and Pakistan. We are not supporting Pakistan. That's a statement which came, I think, yesterday. The second is Pakistan has also said that they are not going to oppose Masood Azhar's designation as global terrorist. Now, this indicates that there has been certain developments which make Masood Azhar a liability. He is no longer an asset. Supposing he is injured, he is ailing, or he is dead. Now, why should Pakistan actually stick its neck out and oppose him, or China stick its neck out and get a global bad name? So that's a possibility that I get a feeling that there has been some change, because I may be wrong. Well, we have to wait and watch. But I get a feeling that this time there is a possibility that China could abstain. That will be equidistant actually. That would be one of the issues where they could probably abstain or go ahead with that. So this is a perception. I may be totally wrong, but there are certain indications which have been coming both from China and Pakistan, which makes me feel that this time this could go through.
Difficult to read Chinese mind. There we have Professor Shrikant, you're expert in Chinese studies. So do you think China has played a sort of a great game in South Asian region where it has boxed India in its own problem, and that has moved the attention away from terrorism, or for that matter from Pakistan to an extent? So does China see India in a hostile light?
Well, both India and China have condemned terrorism. In fact, in 2006 November, when President Hu Jintao came to Delhi, at the time there was a joint statement which mentioned about both countries opposing the three evils, which is a Chinese construct on terrorism: separatism, extremism, and splitism, as they call. And all joint statements have mentioned about the condemnation of terrorist incidents, etc. Although not very specific on Pakistan, not specific on Pulwama, not specific on the Pakistan-based terrorist organizations, etc. So, to that extent, there has been a silent posturing. I think this is because, number one, of the all-weather friendship that China has with Pakistan. It doesn't want to lose an ally. Apart from North Korea, China only has an all-weather friend in the form of Pakistan. For a rising country without friends and allies, it would be difficult for it to circulate in the international system. So to that extent, I think they were backing Pakistan for that reason. Secondly, in the tomorrow's meeting in 1267 committee, it's quite possible that China will be called up by the US at the 11th hour, much like what happened in IAEA and NSG deliberations in 2008, April and October. That time, again, Bush administration had made efforts to reach out to Hu Jintao the then president, and there was some last-minute kind of agreement in terms of the clean waiver in the 123 agreement. So to that extent, I think there is a possibility that China may be convinced by the US, but that depends on the progress in Trump-Xi Jinping trade talks on the tariff issue. So it's a different. Second, I think is quite possible that China may be actually looking for a deal with India in lieu of Chinese support to the post-Pulwama events and the attacks on CRPF personnel. Probably China is looking for some concessions from India in diplomatic practice. For example, India has been opposing Belt and Road Initiative, specifically CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So possibly they're looking at some concessions from India in lieu of any explicit Chinese support in the 1267 committee tomorrow. A third, I think, possibility is that China has had a long-term contacts with all these tanzims. Since 1979, Chinese military intelligence had actually trained several of the mujahideen who have become the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda, and so on. The Chinese deal has been that as long as these organizations do not interfere in Xinjiang on the Uyghur issue, they are willing to back them if they are working in Pulwama, if they are working in Kashmir.
I'll come back to Uyghur. That's very important to understand Chinese perspective. But you also seem to be of a view that there may be change in Chinese stand.
Well, it depends on the US pressure. I think that is a crucial factor there, much as in 2008.
Right. So, I mean, do you also think, Mr. Sajanhar, I mean, that this would be the first time after 3 attempts by China to scuttle the move, that this time around we'll see a different posture from China? Are you also the same view?
Well, there is a possibility because I think the pressure that Pakistan has been facing after the Pulwama attack and the support that India has got to its aerial strikes on the 26th of last month, there has not been any country that has condemned or criticized India for its aerial strikes. So the pressure has been on Pakistan, and I think that pressure, to an extent, is also getting transferred onto China. That having been said, 2 or 3 things. I think getting Masood Azhar branded as a terrorist under 1267 committee, I think is too small a price for India to be paying either for BRI or for CPEC. I think these are huge issues. Those are issues of the nature that if China agrees to support India's candidature as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, I think it would be of that magnitude that India will go ahead and consider doing anything on the BRI. Masood Azhar is too small an issue, too small a fry to sort of, meaning ours has been a very principled opposition to both BRI because of sustainability, debt trap, predatory financing practices, and to CPEC because of the sovereignty and integrity issues as far as India is concerned. So I do not think that, if there was, I agree with what Srikanth says, that there could be a possibility of a transactional approach in terms of what is it that India can offer to China so that, China gives this. Like it has happened in the past also. Notwithstanding, Rajat, what we keep speaking about the Wuhan spirit and so on and so forth. Wuhan spirit goes only up to a certain point, not beyond that. After that, it becomes quite transactional between India and China. We have given something to them in the past when China agreed to bring Pakistan on the Financial Action Task Force, grey listing. So there, if in a similar case, we were able to offer them something, then they might agree here. The second point also that Srikanth made, that, the pressure from the United States. There also, I find it a little difficult. Why? Because the United States has been applying this pressure for quite some time. In fact, when the first move by India was put on technical hold, then the 3 countries, US, UK and France, they moved this proposal in Security Council, but China put a hold there. And to compare the situation today in 2019, what China's strength is and what the United States' comparative strength is, to what the situation was in 2008, when George W. Bush had picked up the telephone and spoken to Hu Jintao and told him to sort of, withdraw or bring down the opposition to the unique waiver that was to be provided to India, I think those situations are quite different. For instance, Xi Jinping is no Hu Jintao, and Mr. Trump might be sort of, raging fury and fire. But I do not think in terms of the differences in the diplomatic, military, strategic and economic strength of the two countries. The equation, the dynamics has changed quite a bit. So while I think that there is a possibility of a transactional approach coming through and going forward, I feel that these two might not really be up there. We'll really have to think of something else to make it go forward.
Right, Mr. Bansal, you wanted to add something to it?
See, just a few things which I wanted to say. China's economy in this quarter is going to face the severest dip as far as its growth is concerned. So China is going through a troubled time. The trade tensions with US have actually not gone the Chinese way. As far as BRI is concerned, I personally feel BRI without CPEC should not be a problem. I have personally been of the view that Karakoram to Kandla or Kathmandu to Mumbai could be prongs of BRI which we should have no problems with, because no trade route allows trade to move only one way. We could also use it and it could be useful. In fact, Karakoram to Kandla actually gives growth to certain areas of India which have hitherto remained backward. Right. So that's one way which we could probably do. Second thing is that Xi Jinping has actually staked a lot on BRI. Now, authoritative streak that which he has shown, where he has actually usurped power in the Maoist mold, if the BRI fails, which at this stage the picture is not too optimistic. Even in Pakistan, where CPAC is going on, if you see the FDI from China, it's actually shrank considerably. If you see the year-on-year figures, the FDI has actually come down by 60 to 70%. That means even the Chinese companies are now reluctant to invest in CPAC. That means they have certain question marks. So there are problems within China, within Pakistan also people are questioning CPAC. Malaysia has pulled out. So BRI today is in a question mark. So any support to BRI at this stage would be a big plus for Xi Jinping, and maybe, because as far as CPEC is concerned, I think compromise is not feasible. Let's be very clear, because CPEC passes through a territory which according to Indian constitution is Indian territory, according to Pakistani constitution is not their territory, and according to Chinese official documents is a disputed territory. So there is no question why government of India can actually accept a road which is passing through that without considering it as an infringement of its sovereignty.
Right.
So to that extent, I don't think so CPAC will be accepted, but there could be other quid pro quos, and there are different issues because, as I said, Chinese economy at this juncture is facing the pressure.
Professor Shrikant, I mean, you discussed about the Uyghur and Kashgar region. Has Pakistan and China's relationship has other contours than what it seems to eyes beyond the BRI and CPEC? Does it go to in other contours in the sense that there were reports that Pakistan had shielded China in OIC when there were some discussions about the politics and violence in Kashgar?
The Chinese have bifurcated this in terms of the responses on Uyghur, which is their national interest, with the terrorism in Pakistan. As I was mentioning, initially when the Soviets occupied Afghanistan, the CIA, the Chinese military intelligence, they all trained these mujahideen. And those instructors from the Chinese military intelligence know all these tanzims in Fatah region, in Afghan-Pakistan borders. So the deal is that as long as the Pakistan-based or Afghan-based units are not supporting the Uyghurs, the Chinese are happy. And in fact, they were also willing to shield some of these groups, such as we see in the 1267 committee, as long as they do not rake up the issues in Xinjiang. That is the deal between China and these groups, which provides a huge maneuverable space for China on that front. as long as they are involved in the Uyghur issue, for example, in 2001, when the ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, was designated as a terrorist organization, one Mr. Rashid, who was the vice president of ETIM, who was involved in some incidents in Xinjiang, was asked by the Chinese to be handed over. The ISI of Pakistan handed him over and he was executed later. Likewise, many other, unlike the Indian demand for those who attacked the Indian parliament, who are not being handed over, the terrorists have actually been handed over to the Chinese side by the Pakistani side. So the deal is working in relation to Pakistan. So to that extent, I think it is a quid pro quo arrangement. As long as they are not involved in the Xinjiang region, they are willing to come to the rescue, as in the 1267 committee or post 9/11 kind of situation for the Taliban.
Mr. Sachin Har, I mean, would like to throw a light upon Chinese equation with Pakistan beyond what, as I was talking to Professor Shrikant, beyond what it seems to the eyes. Like, is it just trade? Is it just economy? Or is it much beyond that? Is
it is much beyond that. You know, that is why they say, you know, that the relationship is, they are iron brothers. It is stronger than iron, steel, and higher than sky, and sweeter than honey. You know, it would not be only because of trade or something. It is a very strategic relationship. I think in a wide variety of ways. It is providing an access to China, to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea through the CPEC and to Gwadar.
Yeah.
You know, when we also talk about the string of pearls strategy by China, Gwadar is a very important component. Gwadar, Hambantota, Myanmar, Djibouti, etc. These are all very, very essential elements of this string of pearls. The other is in terms of China's import of fossil fuels, oil and gas, through the straits, Malacca Straits, Sunda, etc. That faces a large number of choke points. And through Gwadar and through CPEC, it would sort of, you know, have access. And most importantly, Pakistan is willing to do China's bidding, anything that it says as far as India is concerned. So it's a pawn in the hands of China, Pakistan, so that it can, whenever it wants to have something, action taken against India, Pakistan is always ready for that. It's been doing that on its own, and now with the $62 billion of CPEC that China is pumping into Pakistan, and also Chinese currency, you know, bilateral trade starts taking place in RMB. You know, the dependence of Pakistan on China becomes much more. Rajat, I'd like to make one comment there. You know what Alok had mentioned, that we have problem with CPEC, we do not have a problem with BRI. You know, I have a slight bit of difference on that, because if you'd recall that when the BRI summit took place in May of 2017, India was the only country that stayed away from it. Not only because of that, because, you know, our statement of 14th May is very, very clear. One is our issue on CPEC. The other is on issue of BRI. I agree with him when he says that the problems and difficulties for BRI over the last 2 years have multiplied. The latest example is when Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, as the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he goes to China, and I was in Beijing at that time, and in the Great People's Hall, he makes the statement that I am cancelling contracts under BRI worth $23 billion. One is the East China Railway link, two are pipelines. Why? Number one, he says these projects are required by China, they are not required by Malaysia. Number two, it will get Malaysia under heavy debt trap. Number three, that if a Malaysian company were to be asked to complete these projects, they would do it in less than 1/3 of the amount. There is no job creation going to take place in Malaysia. There is no technology transfer. So there are huge issues with BRI that have surfaced, which India was the first country to have raised them in its initial objection. So even if, you know, like the BCIM, the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, that project, India is not keen to go ahead on that. India is not, because of these inherent problems, and we do not want access to be provided to China to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, where we might not have any great advantage.
Mr. Bansal, very briefly, what would the change in Chinese stand on Masood Azhar would mean for the geopolitics of subcontinent?
I just wanted to say, before that, I just wanted to clarify two issues. Because since he said that, I did not say that we have no problems with BRI. I only said that the BRI is something which we could negotiate. With CPEC, there cannot be no compromise. The second, as far as Pakistan-China relationship is concerned, please understand, while at people-to-people level, China has got a huge thing. Any organization today which is fighting the Pakistani government targets Chinese. Just day before, the Chinese embassy has issued actually an advisory for Chinese citizens because Chinese nationals have been attacked. So Chinese nationals in Pakistan are being targeted. Now, if China finally votes in favor of or allows Masood Azhar to be designated a global terrorist, it will only happen when Masood Azhar has ceased to be of any concern to Pakistan. So that is what I am trying to say, that because some indications coming from Pakistan indicate that Masood Azhar is a liability now. He's either incapacitated because, as Qureshi said, he cannot move out of his home, so he's actually ailing so badly that he cannot. So he's of no use. So you designate him global terrorist, you actually, it doesn't affect Pakistan in a great way. So that is what is going to happen. And I think, I hope I am correct, we will see probably the China either abstaining or supporting the motion.
Right. Professor Srikanth, just last word to you. Would you be surprised if China changes its stand this time around, that what they've been maintaining for the last 3 times?
Well, there is a ground for China changing its position tomorrow, partly because the Wuhan, the 10 agreements that were arrived at includes on counterterrorism. Secondly, we have had 7 hand-in-hand joint operations between the 2 armies so far. And thirdly, just a few months ago, Public Security Minister of China came to India, met with the Indian Home Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, and they have signed counter-terrorism related cooperation. So all this suggests that if the national security strategies of India and China are to be aligned on the counter-terrorism, China has to have a different position in the 1267 committee.
Right. Thank you, all 3 of you. Thanks, gentlemen. So clearly, it all depends upon China's stand if Masood Azhar would be banned by the UNSC. The stand which China has taken for the last 3 times, it has vetoed the banning of Masood Azhar, but all eyes on China tomorrow at UNSC debate. Thanks for watching Big Picture.